A day in a medieval inn. The medieval inn, a tapestry of chaos. Hey guys, tonight we begin with something complex, if not slightly pungent, the medieval inn. This was where tired travellers met suspicious stew, where ale flowed freely, and so did lice, and where half your night was spent wondering whether that groan upstairs was someone snoring or dying. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Dawn's dismal awakening. It's not so much that the innkeeper wakes up, it's that he is awakened by the gentle sound of someone sneezing directly onto the floorboards below his room, followed by a groan, a crash, and the unmistakable clatter of a chicken escaping through the front door. Again, he opens one eye. It's still dark out, which means it's either too early or too late. There's no in-between in medieval timekeeping. He sits up slowly as if peeling himself off a loaf of bread and rubs the sleep from his face with a sleeve that once resembled linen but now has the texture of a worn saddlebag. His bed isn't bad, just simple. A straw mattress, slightly slanted with a blanket that smells faintly of garlic and last Tuesday's ale. Cozy, in the way a slightly damp cloak is cozy if you don't ask too many questions. He dresses in stages, first the tunic, then the trousers, then the belt if he can find it. After a brief search, he locates it hanging on a peg behind the door, along with a spoon, a candle nub, and someone's sock. He doesn't ask whose. Asking questions before sunrise is a mistake. Downstairs, the common room is quiet, unnervingly so. There are signs of life, a tipped mug, a boot near the hearth, a man snoring under a table with the confidence of someone who's done this before. The innkeeper steps carefully around him. Waking guests too early often leads to awkward sword-point discussions. He stokes the hearth with a practiced flick of the poker. The goal is warmth, not a roaring blaze. Firewood is expensive, and the last time he got a real blaze going, someone tried to cook a goose on it, indoors, with feathers still on. As he sets a pot over the flames, ready to reheat whatever last night's stew has evolved into, he hears the distant bray of a mule and the clump of early travellers arriving. He exhales. The inn isn't glamorous, but it's warm, it's busy, and most importantly, it's his. And just like that, the day begins again. Breakfast. The questionable feast. Breakfast at the inn is less of a meal and more of a negotiation between what's edible and what's legally defensible. The innkeeper ladles a thick scoop of something into a pot over the hearth. It doesn't have a name, but it does have a smell, somewhere between boiled oats and a wet boot that's been thinking about cabbage. This is pottage, a medieval staple. Not a recipe so much as a concept. Yesterday's pottage was made with barley and turnips. Today's includes those same turnips, now softer, and some mysterious bits from a goose that failed to escape last night. Add water, heat, repeat. It's like soup if soup gave up halfway. The bread is present, hard as a roof tile and just as chewable. It's cut with care, mostly because the innkeeper doesn't want to break another knife on it. Guests chew it slowly, partly for digestion, partly because there's time to reflect on their life choices between bites. And the ale, Oh yes, breakfast beer. It's not a medieval cliché, it's a necessity. The water here is questionable, the milk is reserved for the Lord's barn cat, and tea is still a twinkle in some far-off merchant's eye. The ale is weak, but at least it's been boiled and filtered through sheer desperation. Even the children drink it with supervision, of course. This is a reputable establishment after all. By now, guests are drifting in one by one. A merchant with a coin purse clutched like a holy relic, a sleepy pilgrim still clutching his walking stick and muttering about blisters, and inevitably the bard who requests honey for his porridge as though honey hasn't been locked in a chest for weeks. The barmaid, agile and immune to nonsense, moves between tables like a dancer who's had enough. She smiles at the patrons, refills mugs and dodges unsolicited compliments with the grace of someone who has memorized every possible bad poem a drunk traveller can recite. By the end of breakfast, the inn smells like smoke, barley and ambition. Empty bowls clatter onto tables, stomachs are foolish, spirits are lukewarm. It's not fine dining, but it's hot, it's filling, and nobody's died yet, which by medieval standards is a triumph. Mid-morning. Mayhem. Guests, gates, and goats. If there's one thing a medieval inn doesn't need more of, it's people. Yet by mid-morning they begin to pour in like pigeons with luggage and about the same regard for personal hygiene. First through the door is a knight, or rather, someone claiming to be a knight. He has armour, yes, but it's mismatched, rusty, and held together with what looks like curtain rope. He demands a private room, despite having no coin, no manners, and the general scent of a horse that lost a bet. Behind him is a merchant's apprentice who talks like he owns a fleet of ships but pays with buttons. He tries to haggle over a bowl of soup as though this establishment offers Groupon deals. Then comes the bard. Every inn has one. He never actually pays but insists that his songs are worth more than gold. They aren't. He carries a lute, 6 strings missing, and immediately launches into a mournful tune about lost love and goat theft. Nobody asked for this. A monk shuffles in next, nodding solemnly at everyone and blessing the furniture. He insists on fasting loudly while eyeing the bread. Within 10 minutes he's eating said bread and explaining that technically it's not a sin if the loaf was already broken. By noon the inn is full of clashing personalities and overlapping smells. Someone is drying their socks near the hearth. Someone else is sharpening a knife for no clear reason. A child runs between tables, pursued by a goose with a grudge. In the corner, 2 travellers argue over who gets the only stool without a wobble. And overseeing it all is the innkeeper, calm as a monk on payday. He's seen it all before. He knows that by evening someone will fall in love, someone will fall asleep in their soup, and someone will challenge a stool to a duel, probably the bard again. He pours another mug, wipes the counter with a cloth that has seen better centuries, and gives a nod to the barmaid. A silent agreement that despite everything, this place is still running. The guests may be unpredictable, loud, occasionally bleeding, but they're also what makes the inn, and he wouldn't have it any other way, except quieter and with fewer goose chases. Marjorie, the unseen authority. If the inn has a soul, or at least a functioning brain, it's the barmaid. Her name is Marjorie. She's about 20, possibly 30, or maybe she just aged rapidly from exposure to travelling poets. No one knows for sure. What people do know is that the entire operation would collapse into a stew-soaked heap without her. She moves through the chaos with practiced precision, one hand balancing a tray of mugs, the other swatting a wandering hand that misjudged her patience. Her reflexes are faster than a ferret in a pantry. A drunken mercenary once tried to compliment her ankles and woke up 2 days later with his boots nailed to the ceiling. Marjorie can take an order in 4 dialects, pour ale without spilling a drop, and insult a noble without technically committing treason. She's not rude, she's efficient, and in a building held together by splinters and half-promises, she is the only one with actual authority. She knows which travellers will pay in coin and which will try to barter with seashells. She can sniff out a fake accent, a stolen ring, and a flirt disguised as a food complaint. The monk may mumble about sin, but even he knows Marjorie is the patron saint of keeping things moving. Her day starts before dawn and ends long after the fire burns low. In that time she'll serve stew, chase children, bandage a scraped knee, and somehow find time to refill every mug in the room, often while dodging falling cutlery or calming down an argument about who owns the goat that wandered in during lunch. And yet, she never drops the tray. That's the magic of it. Marjorie doesn't run the inn on paper, but in practice it's her kingdom. The innkeeper might own the walls, but she controls the floor. A wink here, a sharp word there, a stare that can curdle milk. It's a delicate dance, and she performs it daily with the kind of grace that only comes from years of low expectations and high tolerance. Lunchtime. Ruckus, a test of endurance. Lunch at a medieval inn isn't so much a meal as it is a test of coordination, patience, and one's tolerance for noise that registers somewhere between festival and siege. It begins innocently enough. The hearth is warm, the stew is bubbling, and Marjorie rings the battered iron triangle that signals food is ready. A peaceful moment, brief, immediately followed by stampede-level chaos. Guests emerge from corners you didn't know existed. A trader leaps over a sleeping dog. A bard swings his lute over one shoulder like he's marching into battle. 2 farmers argue over who sat down first, despite there being 6 empty benches and absolutely no one keeping score. The innkeeper ladles out steaming bowls of pottage, a dish whose exact ingredients are known only to the pot and possibly divine beings. It's hearty, warm, and completely flavourless, unless you count turnip as a flavour. One guest asks if it's vegetarian. Another asks what vegetarian means. The innkeeper pretends he doesn't hear either of them. Bread is handed out with the ceremonial thunk of something recently used as a doorstop. Diners attempt to dip it in their stew to soften it, resulting in several casualties to the bottoms of bowls. One man tries to trade his crust for a second helping of ale. It works. Marjorie weaves through the chaos, her tray loaded with mugs and her eyes locked in that 1,000-yard stare known only to battlefield nurses and women who've had to break up 2 arguments about seating etiquette before noon. She doles out food, smiles, and issues warnings all at once. A one-woman performance that deserves a round of applause but will settle for a full tip jar. Somewhere near the hearth, a pair of guards is trying to out-burp each other, while a suspiciously cheerful monk hums a hymn between mouthfuls. The goat has returned. Again, it seems to enjoy the company. Lunch lasts about an hour, at least according to the sun. Time inside the inn is measured by how long it takes for someone to spill ale on themselves, accuse someone else of cheating at dice, or attempt to sing with a mouthful of onion. And when it's over, there's silence, brief, eerie, until someone drops a spoon and it all begins again. The afternoon scrape, cleaning up the aftermath. Lunch is over. The stew has been consumed, the bread has been gnawed, the goat has once again been escorted out with stern words and a broom. Now begins the part of the day innkeepers dread most, cleaning up after the guests who swore they were very tidy. To the untrained eye, it may look like a normal dining room in mild disarray, but to Marjorie and the innkeeper, it's a full-blown archaeological dig site, complete with mysterious stains, lost personal items, and a deeply unsettling amount of onion peels in places onions should never have been. The wooden tables are wiped down with a cloth that, much like the innkeeper, has seen too much. It doesn't clean so much as smear everything into a nice medieval glaze. The floors are swept, mostly by pushing things under benches and hoping gravity takes care of the rest. A boot is discovered under one of the stools. No one claims it. It's added to the growing pile behind the bar labelled, possibly belongs to someone. Marjorie starts collecting dishes with the speed and precision of someone who's done this every day for a decade and would very much like to stop. Guests who linger too long get the look, a glance so potent it once made a noble apologize and tip an entire silver coin. He was never seen again, but the story remains legend. The stew pot is scraped clean. Whatever remains is either fed to the pigs or quietly reincorporated into tomorrow's recipe. Waste not, want not, especially when nobody can tell the difference after the third bowl. The innkeeper mutters something about washing the mugs, but everyone knows he'll just rinse them in the rain barrel and call it divine purification. There is a bucket for soaking, but it's mostly ceremonial at this point. As the final crumbs are brushed away and the benches are set back in place, somehow always wobblier than before, the room starts to resemble an inn again, rather than the scene of a particularly well-fed riot. Marjorie takes a breath, straightens her apron, and prepares for the next wave, because in a medieval inn, peace is never permanent. It's just the brief pause between one mess and the next, and somewhere someone is already asking when supper will be ready. New arrivals, the evening's fresh headaches. Just as the last bowl is stacked, the last spoon dried, and Marjorie dares to take a sip of leftover ale in peace, it happens. The door creaks open. New guests, fresh faces, fresh problems, and worst of all, questions. The first traveller steps in wearing an oversized cloak, a beard that could house several woodland creatures, and an expression that suggests he's about to review the place on parchment. He walks up to the bar and asks, "Do you serve almond milk?" The silence is immediate and total. Somewhere in the corner, a stool creaks under the weight of collective judgment. Behind him arrives a young couple, clearly not married based on how closely they're standing and how determined they are not to touch, who ask if they can see the room first. Marjorie simply points upstairs. It's wooden. It has walls. It doesn't leak in summer, usually. A third guest, covered in dust and self-importance, insists on knowing where the inn sources its candles, whether the stew is ethically prepared, and if the goat has been trained to stay outside. The goat, of course, enters at that exact moment and promptly sneezes on his boots. Then there's the bard, a different bard this time, who insists on paying with a song. He plucks his lute, hits 3 wrong notes in a row, and launches into a ballad about the lady in the leaky chamber pot. He is immediately asked to stop, politely, with a broom. The innkeeper nods his way through every request, every complaint, and every mispronounced question about wine varieties. There's one wine, and it's reddish. He doesn't argue. He doesn't correct. He simply listens, smiles, and lets Marjorie handle it, because if there's one thing that fills an inn faster than rain, it's travellers with opinions, and they never arrive quietly. By sundown, the common room is a patchwork of personalities. The quiet scribe in the corner, the arguing merchants near the fire, the bard on his second attempt at winning affection through volume, and the goat now asleep under table 3. The innkeeper exhales. Another batch of guests, another round of small disasters waiting to unfold, and all of them somehow think they're the normal ones. Supper, the night's culmination. Supper time arrives, not with elegance but with noise, loud, overlapping noise. Chairs scrape, mugs clink. Someone coughs theatrically to hint that they've been waiting ages, even though they arrived 9 minutes ago and are still wearing their travelling cloak like it's a crown. Marjorie emerges from the kitchen, holding a pot that's technically still warm and definitely still stew. The day's menu hasn't changed. It's still the inn's signature dish, whatever was left from earlier, slightly reheated. It's served with a chunk of bread that could double as a blunt weapon and a side of commentary from the guests. This stew tastes different than last night, one traveller says with suspicion. It's the same stew, Marjorie replies without looking up. Oh well, it's nice, they add quickly, now fearing for their cutlery privileges. The bard, who is still here somehow, offers to perform a song in honour of the meal. He gets through one verse before Marjorie places a ladle in his bowl with a little more enthusiasm than necessary. He gets the message. Over near the hearth, 2 merchants are having a lively debate about grain prices, which is somehow louder than the couple arguing about how many fleas they counted on the bed upstairs. The goat has returned. It is now under the table again, being quietly fed by a child who insists it's his emotional livestock. The stew is filling, the ale flows freely, which helps with how filling the stew is, and despite the occasional complaint about texture, temperature, or the existential ambiguity of the meat, everyone eats. The innkeeper stands behind the counter, polishing a mug that hasn't been truly clean since last harvest, watching his patrons with the expression of a man who has accepted his fate. He knows that in about an hour someone will spill something, someone else will fall asleep mid-sentence, and the bard will try again. He always tries again. But for now, the room is loud, messy, and very much alive, which is, if nothing else, a sign of success. Because in a medieval inn, supper doesn't need to be good. It just needs to arrive without catching fire. Evening entertainment, the unscripted show. As the last spoon clinks against the bottom of a bowl and guests begin to lean back with the satisfied groans of people who survived another round of stew, the real show begins. Evening entertainment, loosely defined. There is no scheduled program, no flyers, no host with a lute and a schedule. The evening simply unfolds, the way all great performances do, with no structure, limited talent, and a strong chance of mild injury. The bard, of course, seizes the moment. He clears his throat dramatically, plucks 3 uncertain strings, and announces a ballad titled "The Fair Lady of Festerwell Who Married a Troll." Half the room cheers, the other half groans. The goat sneezes. His voice is enthusiastic, the lyrics rhyme occasionally. The innkeeper pours himself a mug of ale and drinks deeply, the way a man does when he knows there are still 6 verses to go, and at least one of them will involve sock theft. Meanwhile, at the far table, 2 old friends are trying to best each other in a slurred riddle contest. The rules are unclear. One of the riddles might actually be a recipe. A nearby monk politely covers his ears and starts humming psalms at a volume typically reserved for church bells. The dice come out next, wooden, chipped, and possibly blessed or cursed. Opinions vary. A small crowd gathers as bets are made using coins, buttons, a very old pair, and one man's left shoe. Nobody questions it. The pair's value is disputed. Marjorie circles the room like a falcon with excellent hearing. She's watching for trouble, spilled ale, and anyone who looks like they're about to stand on a table. She catches the bard mid-step, just as he tries to perform a dramatic gesture on a bench leg that clearly wasn't designed for theatre. In the corner, a shy traveller shyly produces a flute. It produces 3 lovely notes before the goat headbutts him. Applause all around. Evening entertainment at the inn isn't polished, rehearsed, or even entirely legal in some towns, but it's real, it's loud, and it almost always ends with someone snoring into their mug or waking up with a new tattoo drawn in soot. Closing time. The gradual collapse. There is no official closing time at the inn. There's no bell, no lights out announcement, and certainly no polite usher guiding guests toward the door. No, closing time is more of a gradual societal collapse. It begins when the bard finally loses his audience. This usually happens when he forgets the lyrics to the final verse and replaces them with dramatic throat noises. Someone throws a crust of bread in appreciation. It's unclear whether it's applause or a bribe to stop. Next, a few patrons start to slump, not from ale necessarily, but from sheer caloric weight. The stew has settled. Gravity has won. One merchant leans so far back on his stool that he becomes furniture. His companion uses him as a footrest. Marjorie starts stacking empty mugs like she's building a small fortress. She doesn't say much, just raises one eyebrow, which in the language of innkeeping means wrap it up or start sweeping. There's always one guest who insists on ordering something after the hearth has gone dark. Tonight, it's a peddler who thinks a light snack means a full roast duck. He is given bread, a look, and a firm suggestion to chew slowly and sleep sooner. The goat, ever present, has curled up by the embers. It is technically not allowed indoors, but at this point it's paid more attention during story hour than half the humans, so exceptions are made. The innkeeper begins his rounds. He pokes at the dying fire, checks that no one has passed out face down in the stew pot again, and gently nudges a snoring traveller off a table and onto a bench, a professional move learned through years of subtle repositioning. One couple heads upstairs, bumping into every visible surface. They will by morning complain about the noise. The irony is noted and filed away for later passive-aggressive amusement. Eventually, the room empties, not all at once, but in soft, wobbly waves like a tide of cloaks, yawns, and the occasional hiccup. The chatter fades, the laughter dies down. The inn grows quiet. Sort of. A mug rolls off a table. Someone upstairs drops a boot. The goat sighs deeply, but for now, the worst of the day is over. The guests are asleep, or at least horizontal, and no longer speaking. Upstairs, the human hive. Climbing the stairs in a medieval inn is an act of faith, not spiritual faith, structural. The steps creak, groan, and occasionally shift underfoot like they're considering early retirement. But for the weary traveller, upstairs means one thing: a place to collapse. The rooms vary. Some are private if you're wealthy or convincingly loud about it. Most, however, are shared, dormitory-style arrangements where strangers sleep mere inches apart and everyone pretends not to hear anything. The beds are wooden frames stuffed with straw and dreams, blankets if you're lucky, pillows only if you brought your own or creatively folded your cloak. And yes, the straw rustles constantly, sometimes because it's dry, sometimes because something inside it is also trying to sleep. Snoring is inevitable. Someone always starts within moments of lying down, not light, adorable snoring. We're talking medieval snoring, the kind that echoes off wooden beams and makes you question if there's a wild boar in the rafters. One guest tosses in his sleep, another talks. One hums a hymn through his nose, which is deeply unsettling. Privacy as a concept does not exist. You can pull your cloak over your head, but that only muffles the sounds of someone in the next bed loudly discussing dreams involving fish and taxes. Someone else keeps getting up to check on the stew, which is just code for needing the chamber pot, located discreetly behind a curtain that fools no one. Speaking of which, yes, the chamber pot. It's there, it's full, it's everyone's problem. It's also someone's footrest until they realise their mistake too late. Occasionally, someone stumbles in after dark, unsure of which bed is theirs and prepared to argue about it. Arguments are brief, muffled by exhaustion, and typically settled by whoever has the larger boots or stronger odour. And yet, despite the noises, the smells, the suspicious straw, and the shared air, there's something oddly comforting about it. A dozen people, all from different places, sleeping under the same crooked beams, snoring in harmony. Upstairs isn't peaceful, but it's safe, warmish, and with luck, mostly free of goats, which at this hour of night counts as luxury. Midnight patrol, the innkeepers' vigil. It's late. The fire has burned down to glowing embers. The common room is finally still, except for the occasional creak, the kind that makes you wonder if the building is settling or if something alive is navigating the beams. Either way, it's time for the innkeeper's midnight patrol. This ritual isn't written anywhere, but every innkeeper knows it. It involves a candle, an exhausted sigh, and a silent prayer that no one has died, started a fire, or sleepwalked into the pantry again. The tour begins downstairs. The benches are mostly empty, the mugs are half drunk, half spilled, and possibly fermenting into something new. A spoon floats in the ale barrel. The innkeeper doesn't want to know how or why. He checks the doors front and back, both bolted. Probably, maybe. The front one tends to swing open during high winds or emotional conversations. He props a bucket in front of it just in case. Behind the counter, he counts the coins from the day's trade. Most of it is real currency. Some of it is buttons, carved bones, and once again, that same old pair. He places it in the undecided value bowl. Next stop, upstairs. He tiptoes like a man sneaking through a nest of mildly drunk wolves. Each floorboard betrays him with a creak louder than the last. Behind one door, someone snores with conviction. Behind another, someone mumbles about taxes in their sleep. He peeks into the shared room, a sea of limbs and cloaks. One guest is sleeping upside down. Another has tucked themselves under the bed like a human storage box. The chamber pot is full, as always. Then comes the weird part of the patrol. Things that shouldn't be moving. A broom has fallen over again. The candle flickers despite no draft. He hears the unmistakable sound of a lute string being plucked, even though the bard went to bed 2 hours ago or was tied to the wagon outside, depends who you ask. And of course, the goat is missing. Again. The innkeeper exhales. Everything is, by this inn's standards, fine. He descends the stairs, blows out the candle, and mutters, "If anything catches fire, let it be the bad stew." The waking in, a new day's cycle. It's the middle of the night, and technically everyone is asleep, but let's not pretend it's restful. The shared upstairs room hums like a beehive of human discomfort. Snoring is the dominant sound, layered, textured, and deeply unmusical. One guest snores in short bursts like a hiccuping squirrel. Another goes for volume, vibrating the rafters with every exhale. It's like a symphony of sleep apnea. Someone talks in their sleep, mostly about carrots. Another keeps whispering, "No, my lord," in a tone that suggests either a bad dream or a romantic misunderstanding. A boot falls with a thud onto the floor. Nobody moves, not even the goat, now snuggled beneath someone's cloak like it owns the place. The bed frames creak in protest every time someone rolls over, which happens often, as straw mattresses are not known for their ergonomic support. In fact, if you're not stabbed by a twig in the first 5 minutes, the bed is probably haunted. Then there's the heat. With so many bodies in one room, the temperature climbs to barn in summer. Cloaks are shed, blankets kicked, and someone decides to open the shuttered window, immediately letting in a breeze and the local owl, who now refuses to leave. The smell, it's what one might politely call robust, a fragrant blend of stew, digestion, unwashed socks, warm goat, and the vague ghost of ale. It would be unbearable if everyone weren't already too tired to care. Occasionally someone wakes up, convinced it's morning. It's not. It's just darker than before, and now there's an owl watching. They stumble out of bed, step on someone's hand, and are shushed back into place with a grunt. Marjorie sleeps in the back room, ear trained to pick up anything alarming, raised voices, sudden crashes or lute music after hours. So far so good, mostly. And downstairs, the innkeeper snoozes behind the bar in a chair shaped exactly like his spine. He holds a mug he didn't finish. He dreams of silence. He will not get it, because in a medieval inn, sleep comes in short shifts, shared spaces, and suspicious warmth. But still, everyone's horizontal. That's considered victory. Dawn's ritual, a new day begins. At the first hint of light, murky grey, maybe dawn, maybe just an ambitious moon, the inn begins to stir. Not gracefully, more like a barn full of animals who realise someone left the door open. Feet hit the floor with varying levels of commitment. Someone groans dramatically, as if waking up were unfair. Another immediately searches for a missing boot. It's on the hearth. No one knows how the goat does it. The shared room empties in waves. Early risers, merchants, monks, and those with guilty consciences slip out first. Behind them, Wrinkled blankets, muddy footprints, and one traveller muttering in sleep that he never touched the cheese. Downstairs, the innkeeper is already up. Technically, his eyes are open, his body upright, but his soul is still drifting somewhere quieter, where mugs are clean and guests speak in hushed tones. Marjorie arrives soon after, wrapped in a shawl and unshakable will. She silently inspects the aftermath. 2 overturned stools, a missing candle, and somehow jam on the broom handle. Questions begin. Has anyone seen my satchel? Did I pay? Is this my goat? Marjorie answers all with the same slow blink and a flat maybe. Then the denials roll in. I didn't spill the ale. I wasn't snoring. I never said that about the monk's sandals. Even when a ladle's stuck in someone's belt or a turnip's in their boot, everyone denies everything. The bard reappears, blur-eyed, claiming he's written a new verse about the night. He's handed a bowl of porridge and told to eat. For once he does. Breakfast is served, stew reheated, ale poured. By sunrise, most guests have paid or bartered their way out. Some leave sheepishly, others stride off proudly, convinced they were charming. But one truth remains. No one ever admits what happened after supper. The Dutch Golden Age, a republic forged in trade and genius. The rise of a republic, innovation and independence. Early 1600s. In the early 1600s, the Dutch Republic was about the size of a pancake and just as flat. But don't let geography fool you. This modest patch of reclaimed swamp was about to punch far above its weight. While the rest of Europe was busy stabbing each other over religion and whose king had the shinier boots, the Dutch quietly built an empire of light, money, and oil paint. It started with a revolution. Spain had been bossing the Netherlands around for decades, waving the Catholic flag and squeezing taxes out of every fish and tulip bulb. But by 1648, after nearly 80 years of kicking and screaming, the Dutch finally declared, "We're done." And just like that, they were free. What followed was less of a national plan and more of an entrepreneurial free-for-all. Imagine Silicon Valley, but everyone wears wooden shoes and invests in herring. Amsterdam became the Wall Street of Europe. Its ports were crowded with ships headed to Asia, Africa, the Americas, anywhere with goods to trade or people to exploit. The Dutch East India Company, VOC, basically the Amazon Prime of the 17th century, made fortunes off nutmeg, porcelain, and let's not forget colon. But the real twist? While their ships were hauling cinnamon across oceans, back home, people were reading newspapers, sipping beer, and watching their neighbours get immortalised in oil by guys named Rembrandt and Vermeer. These painters didn't just make portraits, they made legends. Vermeer captured quiet, intimate moments lit like divine cinema. Rembrandt gave old men and biblical figures more drama than a reality show. Art wasn't just for kings anymore. Merchants wanted portraits too. Even butchers could afford a nice still life with a pig's head and a lemon. Tasteful. And then there were the tulips. Oh yes, the infamous tulip mania, a brief but spectacular episode where people sold entire houses just to own a flower bulb. One bulb. The market crashed harder than a drunk sailor, but by then the Dutch had already established their reputation, wildly successful, slightly unhinged, and never boring. So how did a tiny, damp republic become the envy of Europe? By mastering the sea, the stock market, and the self-portrait. And this was just the beginning. Global dominance, trade, and colonialism. 17th century. If the Dutch Golden Age had a beating heart, it wasn't in a palace or a parliamentum, it was in the docks. Rotterdam, Amsterdam, Hoorn, Delft, these weren't just cities, they were launch pads for global domination with sails and spreadsheets. While France was polishing its wigs and Spain was still counting its gold, the Dutch were busy inventing capitalism. One logbook at a time. Their secret weapon? The merchant fleet. At its peak, the Dutch had more ships than any other nation on earth, more than England, more than Spain, possibly more than common sense should allow. But these weren't just fishing boats with attitude. These were armed merchant ships, sleek and practical, loaded with cannon and cargo space. They carried everything: silk from China, spices from Indonesia, sugar from Brazil, and occasionally a cannonball to the face if pirates showed up. The Dutch East India Company, VOC, also known by its terrifying acronym, was the world's first multinational corporation. Shareholders, stock markets, dividends. Yes, it was capitalism before it was cool or even ethical. The VOC did whatever it took to protect profit: fortresses, private armies, and let's not sugarcoat it, some rather ruthless colonial tactics. The spice trade wasn't just cutthroat, it was decapitation friendly, and while the VOC was ruling the East, the West India Company was handling things in the Atlantic. Think sugar, rum, and slavery. The Dutch involvement in the transatlantic slave trade was not just incidental, it was systemic, calculated, and profitable. The same country commissioning paintings of milkmaids was also trading human lives on a ledger. The Golden Age had a deeply tarnished underside, yet amid this brutal efficiency, the Dutch also brought a kind of order to global trade. Their ships sailed on set routes, their cargoes were catalogued, their ports were clean, secure, and shockingly well insured. If there was ever a nation that could ship tulips, cheese, and gunpowder in the same boat without confusing the labels, it was the Dutch. They weren't just navigating oceans, they were navigating economics. While other countries sent explorers, the Dutch sent accountants with muskets. Their empire wasn't just built with swords, it was built with balance sheets. And somehow, amid the maritime hustle, their little republic kept thriving. The art of the ordinary. Vermeer's legacy, 17th century. Next, we zoom into the velvet-lit world of Vermeer, where everyday life became eternal. While Dutch ships hauled goods across continents and trading companies turned quarterly profits into golden chandeliers, something else was happening, quietly, almost silently, in the towns and homes of the Dutch Republic. A girl poured milk. A woman laced her pearls. A letter was read in silence beside an open window. And with every mundane moment, a man named Johannes Vermeer turned ordinary life into eternal poetry. Vermeer wasn't the most famous painter of his day. In fact, he wasn't even the busiest. He produced a grand total of about 35 known works. That's less than what Rembrandt spilled on the floor during a single bad week. But what Vermeer lacked in volume, he made up for in radiance. His paintings are calm, composed, and eerily luminous, like someone painted sunlight holding its breath. What set him apart? Precision, detail, and a near mystical understanding of light. The interiors he painted weren't just backgrounds, they were characters. You could almost hear the creak of the wooden floors and the ticking of a clock. And that's the secret of the Dutch Golden Age. While the outside world raced forward, artists like Vermeer captured the sacredness of slowness. Of course, Vermeer's magic wasn't performed in a vacuum. This was a society that adored images. The average Dutch home in the 17th century had more paintings on the walls than forks in the kitchen drawer. Landscapes, portraits, ships, cows, and a generous number of dead fish arranged on tables. They loved it all. Why? Because this was a middle-class country. Merchants, bakers and brewers had money and taste. They didn't want cherubs floating in clouds. They wanted something that looked like their world, but slightly better lit. And the painters delivered. Dutch art became an industry, fast, detailed and refreshingly local. But back to Vermeer. His works weren't flashy or political. They didn't shout, they whispered. And in those whispers were volumes about intimacy, solitude and the quiet drama of domestic life. He painted what was often overlooked and made it unforgettable. In the next chapter, we'll step out of these golden lit rooms and into the streets of a booming republic, because outside Vermeer's windows an economic experiment was brewing that would both dazzle and implode. The infamous tulip mania. Tulip mania, the bubble of beauty, 1630s. Picture this. You walk into a pub in 1636. You're just a regular Dutch citizen, maybe a baker or a cheese merchant. A man next to you offers to sell you a tulip bulb, not a bouquet, just one bulb. The price? The same as your house. And the crazy part, you consider it. Welcome to tulip mania, the fever dream of early capitalism and possibly the world's first recorded financial bubble. The Dutch didn't invent flowers, of course, but they perfected the art of monetizing them. Tulips, especially the rare striped varieties caused by a virus that oddly made them more desirable, became status symbols. Owning a unique tulip bulb was like driving a Ferrari today, except you had to dig it out of the dirt and hope no one accidentally made soup out of it. At first it was just wealthy collectors dabbling, but soon everyone wanted in. Farmers, barbers, chimney sweeps. If you could hold a coin and had a pulse, you were speculating in tulips. Entire savings were spent, futures contracts were created, people traded rights to bulbs that hadn't even bloomed yet. It wasn't about flowers anymore, it was about flipping a promise before the petal ever showed. For a brief, dazzling moment, tulips were the Bitcoin of the 17th century. Then came the crash. One February day in 1637, people stopped buying. Maybe they blinked and realised they were mortgaging homes for plants. Maybe someone actually saw a tulip and thought, wait, that's it? Prices collapsed, fortunes vanished, and suddenly, that one bulb you paid the price of a canal house for, worthless. You might as well plant it and try to enjoy the view. Strangely enough, the Dutch economy didn't fully collapse with the tulip market. It was embarrassing, yes. There were lawsuits, there were public sermons about greed and vanity, but the Republic shrugged, dusted off its doublets and moved on. It wasn't their last brush with speculative mania, just the prettiest one. Tulip mania became a moral tale about hubris, irrational markets, and the human tendency to chase beauty until it bites. But while the bulbs rotted, the Dutch spirit didn't. Because just around the corner, the Republic was building a cultural empire on books, maps, and ideas. And that's where we head next. The Republic of Ideas. Print, philosophy, and cartography, 17th century. While tulips were being traded like gold and Vermeer was busy painting women doing very quiet things near windows, something else was quietly blossoming in the Dutch Republic. The mind. The Dutch didn't just ship goods, they shipped ideas. And in the 17th century that was dangerous business. Let's start with printing presses. At a time when publishing the wrong opinion in, say, Spain could get you literally burned at the stake, the Netherlands became a haven for writers, philosophers and rebels with quills. The Dutch had a relatively tolerant attitude toward free thought, at least as long as it didn't mess with trade, which meant books flowed out of Amsterdam like wine at a merchant banquet. Ideas banned elsewhere found safe harbour here. Descartes wrote and published in the Netherlands. Baruch Spinoza the excommunicated Jewish philosopher who suggested that maybe God wasn't an old man in the sky but something more like reality itself, lived and thought here in relative peace until he became too radical even for the radicals. Universities like Leiden and Utrecht became intellectual magnets. Students from across Europe came to study everything from law and medicine to the latest theories in optics and anatomy. And because this was the Dutch, they studied in buildings clean enough to eat off and catalogue their knowledge with terrifying precision. Dutch map makers like Joan Bleyu were not just sketching coastlines, they were redrawing the European imagination. Their atlases were masterpieces, decorative, wildly inaccurate in parts, but astonishingly detailed for their time. Want to explore the coast of Java or dream about Brazil? Just open a Dutch map. This intellectual curiosity wasn't limited to scholars. The middle class read voraciously pamphlets, travelogues, scientific treatises, and scandalous poetry. Newspapers circulated stories from Constantinople to the New World. For the first time in European history, literacy wasn't a luxury, it was a lifestyle. But it wasn't all enlightenment and espresso. These ideas stirred the pot. Religious tension simmered. Philosophers were censored. Some books were quietly banned. The Dutch tolerated a lot, but even tolerance has its limits when profits start messing with property law. Still, for a republic of just a few million people, the Dutch punched far above their weight in shaping modern thought. And speaking of shaping, next we turn to the architectural boom that transformed their cities into Baroque Lego sets of brick, canals, and proud gables. Architectural masterpieces, cities of order, 17th century. Imagine a city built like a painting, straight lines, soft curves, and everything in its proper place, even the ducks. That was Amsterdam in the 17th century, a masterpiece of urban design brought to life by engineers, merchants, and a stubborn refusal to let water win. The Dutch didn't just build cities, they drained them into existence. Much of the land the Republic stood on was technically underwater or had been recently persuaded not to be, with dikes, pumps, and sheer willpower. The Dutch reshaped their world. Where other nations saw swamp, they saw potential real estate. At the heart of this watery miracle was the canal ring of Amsterdam, known as the Grachtengordel. It was elegant, efficient, and about as close as urban planning gets to poetry. Concentric canals carved the city into districts. Goods moved by boat, not cart. Rich merchants built narrow houses with steep steps and grand windows, showing off just enough wealth to impress, but not enough to look French. Those tall houses with the ornate gables, they weren't just aesthetic choices, they were tax strategies. Property taxes were based on width, not height, so people built upward, not outward, squeezing luxury into vertical elegance. The result? An architectural skyline that looks like gingerbread real estate and smells faintly of Calvinist restraint. Brick was the material of choice. It was cheap, durable, and made the streets look like a Renaissance Minecraft server. But design wasn't only about beauty. The Dutch emphasized utility. Even their ornate facades had winches and pulleys to lift furniture up through windows, since spiral staircases inside were less stately and more claustrophobia simulated. Public buildings also bloomed. Town halls, wayhouses, guild halls. The grandest of them all, Amsterdam's town hall, finished in 1655. It was so magnificent that Louis XIV reportedly called it the eighth wonder of the world and promptly copied it, as was his habit. And amid all this architectural splendour, there was a message. The Dutch Republic wasn't about kings or cathedrals, it was about cities, citizens, and civic pride. Clean streets, tidy facades, order and elegance. This was a built environment that reflected a national mindset, precise, practical, and quietly proud. But beneath this order, tensions simmered. Political divisions, religious strife, and international rivals were gathering. In the next chapter, we dive into the conflicts, internal and external, that would test the very seams of this golden republic. Continued, cracks in the golden facade, conflicts and decline, late 17th century. For all its brilliance, the Dutch Golden Age wasn't some utopia of harmony and polite cheese tasting. Behind the tulips and oil paintings lay a republic built on tension, political, religious, and increasingly military. First, the politics. The Dutch Republic wasn't really a republic in the modern sense. It was a jigsaw puzzle of provinces, each jealously guarding its rights like a toddler hoarding snacks. The real power lay with the wealthy merchant class in cities like Amsterdam and Leiden. These men weren't nobles, but they had the money to pretend. At the top of the political pyramid was the stadtholder, usually from the House of Orange, a military leader with just enough power to make everyone nervous. Think of him as a monarch with the disclaimer. Some provinces liked him, others liked him less. The result? A constant tug of war between centralized leadership and provincial independence. A sort of political group project, where half the group wants to fire the leader and the other half is the leader's cousin. Religiously, the Dutch had technically broken with Catholicism, but that didn't mean unity. The Calvinists were in charge, and they weren't exactly famous for their open-mindedness. Other Protestants, Jews, and Catholics were tolerated as long as they didn't cause a fuss, build big churches, or throw parades. Publicly, everything was orderly. Privately, it was tense. Internationally, the Dutch were suddenly a major power, and the old guard didn't like that. The English, once their Protestant pals, now saw them as economic rivals. Cue the Anglo-Dutch Wars, a series of naval brawls where both sides lost ships, pride, and occasionally their tempers. The Dutch held their own, thanks to admirals like Michiel de Ruyter, who was equal parts pirate, strategist, and national hero. He once sailed up the Thames and stole the English flagship for fun, but warfare is expensive. Maintaining fleets, defending trade routes, and bribing neighbours not to attack, all this added strain to a delicate system. And while the Dutch could juggle commerce, culture, and colonies, they couldn't juggle forever. The cracks in the Golden Age had begun to show, not in the art or the architecture, but in the very system that built it. The twilight of a Golden Age, a quiet fade late 17th, 18th century. Next, we'll visit the twilight of this era and ask, how does a Golden Age end? With a crash, a war, or simply a yawn from history? Golden Ages don't typically end with explosions. More often they fade quietly, awkwardly, like a party where the best guests have already left and someone just knocked over the wine. The Dutch Republic in the late 1600s wasn't collapsing. It was the signs were subtle at first. Trade remained strong, but competitors were catching up. The English and French were getting better at naval warfare and even better at copying Dutch business models. The English created their own East India Company, threw in some colonial ambition, and added the one thing the Dutch didn't have, a monarchy with a flair for self-promotion. Meanwhile, France under Louis XIV had grown aggressive, very aggressive. He wasn't content with verses and fancy shoes. He wanted borders, power, and maybe a few Dutch cities while he was at it. The resulting wars were brutal and expensive. The Dutch won a few, lost a few more, and bled money throughout. Domestically, the Republic had another problem: boredom. Innovation slowed. Painters stopped painting radical new ideas and started repeating what sold. rows of cows, ships, and sleepy wind. Art became safe. Banking became cautious. The canal houses were still pretty, but the energy had shifted. You could feel the flicker in the oil lamp. There were deeper fractures too. The divide between the House of Orange and the Republican regents deepened. The middle class, once the engine of prosperity, began to stagnate. Tensions brewed between old money and new ambition. And most importantly, young Dutch people stopped believing they were at the centre of the world because they weren't anymore. The final blow came not as a single disaster, but as a shift in wind. The age of enlightenment was dawning elsewhere. Britain took the crown as the world's financial and naval superpower. France stole the stage in art and science until the guillotine got involved. And the Dutch, once the marvel of Europe, found themselves quietly edged out of the spotlight. But the legacy of the Dutch Golden Age never disappeared. It lived on in libraries, in galleries, in legal codes and shipping routes. The world they helped shape didn't forget them. They just stopped being the main character. The enduring footprint, a model for the modern world. Next, in our final chapter, we explore the lasting impact of this remarkable era and how a tiny republic changed the course of the modern world. Though the curtain fell on the Dutch Golden Age, its echoes have never truly stopped. The 17th century republic might have lost its global dominance, but it left fingerprints on everything from economics to art to how we imagine freedom itself. Let's start with capitalism. The Dutch didn't invent money, trade, or greed, but they streamlined them with breathtaking efficiency. They created the world's first stock exchange, pioneered shareholder capitalism, and made financial instruments that are still used today. If you've ever cursed your mutual fund or stared blankly at a line graph, you have Dutch merchants to thank. They also revolutionized global commerce, not just through ships, but through systems, insurance, record-keeping, double-entry bookkeeping, all sharpened to near perfection in Amsterdam. And while they certainly weren't saints, hello colonialism, they were logistical geniuses. They made trade scalable, predictable, global. In the arts, their influence is immortal. Vermeer's quiet light, Rembrandt's stormy faces, the intimate realism of domestic scenes, these became the visual grammar of Western art. Their paintings taught us that greatness didn't require gods and swords. Sometimes it was a woman pouring milk, caught in a moment of stillness. In ideas, they carved out a space for reason. The Dutch tolerance, imperfect but notable, allowed thinkers like Spinoza and Descartes to publish works that would have been burned elsewhere. In doing so, they helped push Europe toward the Enlightenment. Freedom of thought, religious pluralism, scientific curiosity, all took root in the Dutch soil. Even their cities set a standard. Amsterdam's canals, Utrecht's universities, the brick gables and clean navigable streets all served as templates for modern urban life. Order without opulence, function dressed in elegance. They didn't build for kings, they built for citizens. And perhaps that's the heart of it. The Dutch Golden Age wasn't about empires or cathedrals or divine right. It was about what a small, determined, soggy republic could achieve with brains, grit, and slightly obsessive bookkeeping. It didn't last forever. Golden ages never do. But in the brief glow of that century, the Dutch showed the world a new model of success, one powered not by royalty, but by ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Thanks to them, the modern world sails in their wake, charting new waters on maps they helped draw.